Coming up, the push to get Native people to the polls is on. We'll hear about the efforts by the Native Action Network. A Rapid City organization brings Indigenous artists together. Plus, you might know the music of Darryl Tonemah. Now you can hear his podcast where he mixes music with psychology. We'll talk to the Singing Psychologist. I'm Mackenzie Allen Charmley. Join us for those interviews plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
The Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University is honored to be a supporter of Indian Country Today. Working with award-winning professors, Cronkite students learn news reporting, social media, shooting and editing videos, and producing content for communications industries. Cronkite's 15 professional programs give students the opportunity to cover critical issues throughout the U.S. and beyond. Learn more at cronkite.asu.edu.
This is the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez.
Chinangale, we're glad you could join us. Aaliyah Chavez has the day off. We start our newscast in Brazil, where the world is watching the results of the country's historic election. Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva said the people of his country are the real winners of the elections after he defeated incumbent Jair Bolsonaro. The country's new president-elect is called Lula by his people. He has vowed to stop widespread deforestation of the Amazon and to combat mining. Indigenous organizers and climate justice groups celebrated his win, saying his platform calls for sustainable development.
That's why I think it's an important virtue that government should reflect caring and love of country and its people. We don't lack love in this country, and we are going to defend, with love, Brazil and the people of Brazil. We will enter into a new era of peace, love, and hope.
Da Silva was previously the president of Brazil from 2003 to 2010. With 99.9% of the vote tallied, the Brazilian Election Authority said Da Silva's victory was a mathematical certainty, and he will enter the office at a time when economic growth and combating inflation is the greatest priority. In California, the Committee on Native Affairs held a hearing last week on ancestral co-management policies. An informational hearing of the California Assembly Select on Native American Affairs took place to discuss challenges in claiming ancestors' remains held by institutions and museums. Tribal leaders shared their experiences, and the hearing served as a solutions-based discussion to recommend new policies for co-management of a variety of issues. This included the proposal of a council to collaborate with the California Natural Resources Agency. The council would evaluate nature-based solution projects and the distribution of $70 million to increase tribal access and co-management of public lands, as well as recommend policies and guidance for increasing tribal ancestral land return. A new documentary is speaking for the voiceless, houseless people in Edmonton, Canada. The participants of the film asked for members of the public to treat them with kindness, compassion, and understanding. APTN's Chris Stewart has the story.
The Art Gallery of Alberta screened the documentary, Invisible Persons, Stories from Boyle Street. Boyle Street Community Services created it to give a voice to those who are not heard often. Project creator Dan Zimmerman says many people opened up to him on camera.
I'm privileged to work in the drop-in down at Boyle Street, and we had a bunch of folks that were there the day we were filming, and we just asked them. We were very clear what we were up to, and some folks were pretty private, but a lot of folks really jumped at the chance to share their wisdom and their stories.
And still have a smile 24/7, even though I get into an argument, somebody argues with me, somebody punches me, I turn around and look at them and I say, you know what, sis or bro, no matter what, I will always love you. Whatever anger you have, let's deal with it in another way.
Zimmerman says he wants people to take away that everyone is a person and have their own unique stories.
We're featuring 4 folks tonight, and one of the folks, Adam, he's someone who moved here from Ontario, is a welder by trade. Just fell into some difficult situations, but is such an eloquent speaker.
I think mostly what we need is kindness, right? We really need that. So I try to offer that. However I can. Sometimes it's not much. Sometimes it's just smiling. Sometimes that's all it is.
Once you're on the street, you're stuck on the street. And it's hard to break through. And if you're working, at least that way you got something to strive for, right?
Zimmerman says he hopes the public's perception of those people currently down on their luck changes.
I really am grateful that they were able to share their stories, because I think our inner city community sometimes is really marginalized, and we don't necessarily see them as citizens. We see them as problems.
Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
An incredible Indigenous woman and Arizona's first Native news reporter is receiving an honor for her work with Native American youth. Mary Kim Titla, Executive Director of Unity, was recently announced as a winner of the Neighborhood Builders Racial Equality Award. The award recognizes local leaders advancing racial equality and economic opportunity for Indigenous people and communities of color. Titla will also receive a $200,000 grant that she will direct to her organization, whose mission is to empower and support Native youth. The San Carlos Apache citizen says she is honored to be able to direct this grant to Unity to continue to impact the lives of Indigenous youth. Other recipients of the award include Vida Lynn, Calvin Holmes, David Robinson, and Orsinia Lopez. Congratulations, Mary Kim and Unity. And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. Racing Magpie was awarded $40,000 over 2 years from Wagner Foundation and Via Art Fund. Peter Strong and Mary Bordeaux talked with ICT's Shirley Snavy about the grant.
The consortium of funders on the East Coast who come together to support arts organizations around the country that are trying to push forward or foster ongoing dialogue about important artistic and creative endeavors. And so we were encouraged by a few other people to put our hats in the ring, and we applied and were awarded it earlier this year. And it's intended to be like general operating support as far as the funds go, just to support us in continuing to do what we're doing. And then we're part of a cohort, so by the end of our 2-year run, we're going to visit with the other organizations and become part of this national network of organizations trying to do this.
So Mary, tell us a little bit about the history of Racing Magpie.
So we actually started out as a LLC, and we're similar to what we do now, artist studios, community space, and a gallery. But Racing Magpie, actually we wanted to just be a gallery and like an office space, and then some of our friends who are artists and work in the creative field were like, oh, I need an office space and we don't need a lot, so maybe we could go in together. And then an artist was like, it would be cool if I could have a studio space, and we're like, yeah, that would be cool. And then pretty soon what was going to be like an office and a gallery turned out to be like 8,500 square feet of like studio space and classroom space and nonprofit office space. And it just kind of grew. And, as we were like 7 years old now, and, within the first couple of years, really just heard from a lot of artists and community, the needs that they had and wanted, and to be able to spend time together and have these flexible spaces to do like sewing circles or community meetings, or I was trying to think of the other things that we've had classes and workshops and things like that too. So and so we've been trying to be just really responsive to what the community needs. And we started out in downtown Rapid City, and then have with this past couple of years, we were able to purchase a building, or 2 buildings. It was kind of a 2-for-1. If we wanted one, we had to buy the other one too. So we have 2 buildings and similar square footage now, and but realizing that we needed more flexible space than artist space, because and so but we have a bigger gallery now. And yeah, did I miss anything? I don't think so. Yeah.
I mean, just to reframe what Mary's saying too, I think one thing we started out with and we've been really focused on with our board and our work is this idea of recentering the conversation about arts and culture around the artists and the community. I think like that's a big picture shift that it's just natural to Mary and me and to the folks who interact with us regularly. But I think it's not so common in non-native art settings and elsewhere, even around here in the Rapid City area or in South Dakota, studio spaces and space and programming for folks to talk to each other and listen and share ideas and be inspired, and a gallery that's for Native artists, that's not based solely on sales, right? Mm-hmm. Like taking some of the market pressure off of artists. How can we curate exhibits where artists can really explore their creative expression and the impact that has on issues like racism in South Dakota and Rapid City, or I mean, all those issues, right? Like I think art is that place where those conversations can start among people with different ideas and different backgrounds. And I'd like to think that we've been doing that over the last 7 years, and we keep trying to center that in the work we do in the future.
How long have you been in South Dakota?
I have been here 17 years, almost 18. I moved in 2005 to be the director at Red Cloud at the Heritage Center.
I remember meeting you, and that was interesting. You said, "Yeah, I think I'll stay here for a couple of years."
Absolutely. I think that's everyone who moves here, just 2 to 3 years, and yeah, here I am. And it's the place, and it's the artists, and it's the family, right? Being married into a Lakota family, and it's important to be here and build relationship and follow through on those relationships too. So for me, as a white guy who grew up in Ohio and who's lived in a few different places, it's about relationship with people and place. And Racing Magpie, I think, centers that as well in everything we do.
Tribal leaders all across Indian country are gearing up their citizens to vote next Tuesday if they haven't already mailed in their ballots. And in urban cities, local groups are doing the same thing to galvanize the Native vote. In downtown Seattle, Washington, the Native Action Network held a Be a Rockstar Vote early event this past Saturday. Joining us to tell us about the event is Elena Kapoman. She's a program manager with the Native Action Network. Welcome, Elena.
Manugwitu. Thank you.
So just to get right into it, how did your event turn out?
It was great. We had people from all over the city come, even as far away as Yakima, and we are just so proud of our community coming out and registering to vote and voting early in Washington. You know, we get our ballots through the mail, and so we're really encouraging folks to put them in the ballot boxes, put them in the mailboxes before November 8th.
Yeah. And when it comes to the Native vote, we hear how important and impactful it can be. Can you share with audiences why that is?
Well, you know, Native Americans, only about 34% of us are registered to vote, and that's about 1.2 million people. So imagine how much our votes could impact these elections if we were all registered, if we all turned out to vote. And Native Action Network is that's one of the foundations of our work, is to make sure our voices are heard, take our seat at the table, and advocate for our issues that are important to our communities. There's just so much coming up and so many things we need to be present for. And this is our opportunity to make our voices heard and our votes count.
I want to go back and touch more on the event itself. What were some of your favorite parts?
We had an amazing set of DJs. They had us all dancing and just celebrating being together again in person. And we also had some amazing artists that we used as door prizes, some of their items, like Copper Canoe Woman, the Natives. And there was one artist out of Suquamish who made a ribbon skirt and a beaded set, and we made that our main door prize if people participated in some of our social media to reach more people that weren't able to be with us in person, encouraging them to vote early. We were fortunate enough to get funding from MTV, so they provided the ability to have this gathering and to do some more of our work. So that's exciting when you get support from national organizations like that, and they're highlighting our work across their platforms.
When it comes to fostering community, what do events like that do for, aiding in the initiative to go and vote? Do you think it builds some kind of bond?
Yeah, I think just being together in person, seeing our relatives again in a positive way, and encouraging people to elevate their voices and to exercise sovereignty like this is just so powerful. And being able to laugh together again and eat together and dance. And we had fun. We dressed up in costumes and we had a little costume contest. It's just great to be back together. And when we can pair that with something as important as exercising our right to vote, it's just an amazing night.
So the Native Action Network is known for empowering Native women and getting them to vote and run for office. Can you touch on some of those women that you've seen?
Absolutely, yeah. Native Action Network got its roots from the Seattle Women's Service League, which was really focused on empowering urban Indians, bringing them together. So Claudia Kaufman and Iris Friday in 2001 formed Native Action Network, and the foundation is, as you said, elevating Indigenous women, primarily all ages, intergenerational leadership forums. We hold youth academies. We have a 10-month Legacy of Leadership cohort, which really develops leadership skills and introduces people, sometimes for the first time, to the legislative process, and also community organizing. We also have a nonprofit capacity building program, and our shining star this year is one we call Advocacy Boot Camp. It's advocacy training, leadership development, and we kind of do a deep dive into the legislative and political process. And the point of that is to claim our seat at the table as Indigenous women. We've had a couple women that did put their name in the hat for everything from school boards to the state legislature. In Washington, there are 3 women running for the House and 2 women running for the House, 1 man, and 1 woman running for state Senate. So we're encouraging all of them, hoping people turn out to vote for their districts and nationally.
And with the election coming up in just a few days, do you have any events leading up, pushing to the day?
Yes, we are going to have an election watch party in Seattle on November 8th. So we're encouraging folks to join us and watch the returns, celebrate our victories, and just be community and celebrate that we're here and that we have voted.
Well, Elena, thank you so much for joining us today. It was great to speak to you about the Native vote.
Thank you very much.
For years, Darryl Tonemah has worked with tribal communities and organizations with his company, Tonemah Consulting Group, to tackle both mental health and physical health. He has a PhD in counseling, psychology, and cultural studies. He's also an award-winning musician, and he often uses music to reach his audience. And now he's developed a podcast where he definitely mixes both. It's called The Singing Psychologist, and he launched it this year. Welcome, Darryl Tonemah.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So just to begin, could you tell us how this podcast evolved?
Well, coming out of COVID, I had so many phone calls from tribes and school districts and communities about people having their first bout with stress or depression or anxiety, and a significant uptick in suicidality, suicidal ideation, suicide attempt in our communities. And there were just so much work that needed to be done. I thought, well, what if we could use technology to kind of get more information out? So we started doing the podcast called The Singing Psychologist. And really the heart of it is to get information and tools to as many people as we can. Using technology really creates economies of scale so more folks have access to it.
So you have 12 episodes so far, but one that's immensely interesting is the one titled Grit. Could you tell us about that?
Oh, yeah. Grit, there's been a lot of research, probably the past 5 years around the concept of grit. And the research found that out of all the athleticism and intellectual and heart and things like that, the one thing that really contributed to people moving forward was grit, was that I'm going to keep trying. And I think that's a great message for myself, for my children, for our communities. Is there are a lot of obstacles, there are a lot of barriers. It's been hard, and particularly the last couple of years have been especially hard. And keep leaning into it as communities. One of the core statements, values of the podcast is the concept of personal sovereignty. So sovereignty in a social, cultural context is, are we in charge of our language and finances and government and ceremony, things like that? That's sovereignty in our social perspective. But personal, individual sovereignty is, can I even control my heart rate in this moment? Can I control my own body so I have a menu of responses instead of just a reaction? Because what stress and trauma, what their end game is to strip us of sovereignty. Stress and trauma's end game is to have us hiding in our houses, in our bedrooms, under the blankets, not wanting to engage in the world. And part of how we reclaim sovereignty is opening those doors and kicking open those silos and re-engaging community. One of the cool things that I like to say is that I think it's cool anyway, is that we suffer in silos and we heal, we thrive in community. And community is really the foundation of us as Native people.
You know, you mentioned the body, and historical trauma is a subject that you cover in your podcast. Can you tell us about how the vagus nerve kind of explains historical trauma?
Well, a lot of work, and a lot of great work, talks about trauma as just a cognitive process. And that's where people say things like, well, why don't you just get over it? Think about something differently, which it's much more complicated than that, because all the research that leans into this talks about at the cellular level, how the body bears the burden. And I'm just fascinated with the vagus nerve and how it has changed to help us to survive. And if we haven't done our healing, then I'm just passing some more on to my children and their children and their children. And so one of the ways that I can speak to my descendants, and one of the ways that my ancestors speak to me, is what healing things are we doing in our homes, in myself, in our communities, that the vagus nerve, which kind of reads all of this body information, can start to heal, can start to thrive. So it does give me a more sense of personal sovereignty.
You mentioned community and the impact that that can have. But with your podcast, you are building community in a sense. How does it feel to have that impact in your work?
Well, I hope we're building community. That's really the foundation. It isn't, and honestly, my full intention is just to get information out to people. It has very little to do with me. I just want to make sure that, well, this is this, and I consider our work to be as translators. I'll look at all this research and I'll read all these texts and I'll say, well, we need to know this, and I'll use that as the format to get the information to the people. And I hope the communities, we create communities of healing with each other. I hope that people start to recognize that we aren't crazy and we aren't wrong. We aren't ruined. We are built for survival. And sometimes that looks uncomfortable. But once we start leaning into that as groups, as people saying, we want something different. We want to be more empowered in our social groups, then that starts to expand and that starts to expand. And that can be a very powerful thing. And it's cool to be involved in my little way.
Well, Darryl Tonemah is the Singing Psychologist, and we thank you so much for telling us about your podcast.
Thank you for having me.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest, visit ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.
Sometimes you got to take a stand, just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.